Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're starting a few minutes late. We had really some connection problems. Some of our people from outside trying to join virtually. But welcome to this SASPEN Conference 2022. More will be said about the program a bit later by the network coordinator, Ms. Susan Malewa. You have seen the theme for our conference, Social Protection at a Crossroads between COVID-19 and the SDGs, Southern African perspectives. I'm the Maurice Olivier. I'm the chairperson of the Board of Trustees. And for now, let me say again, welcome. We appreciate your being here and your participation in this conference. And good to see so many good friends and colleagues after quite a few months. Last year in August, we had our prior conference. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm going to call on a few colleagues to give welcome remarks. And the first person to do so is Ms. Mildred, or Dr. Mildred Mushunye. She's the vice chair of the board of directors, which is one of the other governance structures of SASPEN. And she is doing it on behalf of the chair, Mr. Ngosa Chisupa from Zambia, who has problems to join virtually. So Mildred, please come up. Ladies and gentlemen, if I have time to introduce all of these speakers, it would have probably taken us the whole morning. They're all, people with so much expertise, and Mildred, Dr. Mushunye, certainly no exception. She's been working in this area of social protection for many, many years. Well-respected senior person, also focusing amongst others on gender issues. In fact, she will be presenting kind of a keynote paper tomorrow on gender and social protection in the wake of COVID-19. So, Mildred, on behalf of the Board of Directors, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Marius. I speak on behalf of Mr. Ngosa, who's our chairperson. He's been unable to connect, or he's trying to connect, but we didn't want to delay the start of the meeting. So allow me to start by recognizing the Directorate of the Department. Thank you. I was really... So allow me to start by recognizing the Directorate of the Department of Social Development, DSD, Mr. Linton Mchunu. Let me also recognize the FES resident reps for Zambia and South Africa. We'll be interacting with them throughout the course of the conference. The Board of Trustees of SASPEN, whom you'll also get to meet at some point during the social evenings, the social gatherings. The Board of Directors. Allow me also to recognize our international colleagues from the international agencies here present. We do have a couple. I will not name them individually, but we do have a representation from various international organizations, conference delegates, and everyone here present whom I might not have recognized individually, but please do feel recognized and welcome. So I stand here to just welcome you to this conference. After, I think, maybe 2 years of COVID, it's good to be connecting physically. Last year, we did have a similar conference, hybrid in nature, but it's never the same when you connect face to face. So it's good to see people. It's good to connect with you physically. And I hope that we'll have good interactions, good discussions. And we're here this year with the objective of looking at what COVID has done in the context of social protection, also looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. We were on some trajectory, we're on some path towards the SDGs, and COVID has hit us. So we want to have a discussion around what it is that we need to be doing in order to make sure that we get back on track in terms of the SDGs, in terms of Africa, of the Africa Agenda 2063, and so on. So we have experts in this room, and I'm sure we'll be able to have fruitful discussions and share insights, experiences of how we can influence the policy arena in terms of social protection in the context of COVID. I want to emphasize the fact that it's important that we continue to create partnerships amongst ourselves. I'm awed each year when I come to the SASPEN conference because I see new faces, I see new partners, and I'm always excited to be connecting with new entities. So this is an opportunity for us to connect, to create partnerships that will advance the social protection agenda. We have behind the scenes a very strong committee, the conference organizing committee that is responsible for putting the conference together, headed by Professor Marias. So I want to thank the work that the COC has done in terms of reading through abstracts, selecting, providing feedback, and so on. Very difficult task, but they have done it so well. So I want to appreciate the work of the COC in putting this, this conference together. So let me not continue anymore, lest I start getting into other people's territory. So let me just say welcome to all of us. It's good to see you, and I hope that we'll enjoy the conference. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you so much to Dr. Mildred Mushunye. Our second speaker will make some welcome remarks. He's representing the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, the FES. In fact, you may have seen on the program that there would be two FES speakers. The regional representative in South Africa, we were informed this morning that he contracted COVID and cannot make it. But Mr. Fritz Kopsiker is the representative of the FES in Zambia. And as I will say a bit later in this session, we really want to acknowledge again the wonderful support over the years that we have been receiving from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, the Zambia office responsible for this regional activity as well. I will say a few words more about that, but let's just acknowledge that without that support, this conference would not have been possible, as was the case with our previous conferences as well. Mr. Kopsiker, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, being German, I'm not very strong on protocol, not as much as you are and some of our Anglo-Saxon relatives. So please allow me to ride on the protocol of Mildred Mushunye. But nevertheless, I welcome and I thank the representatives of the government of the Republic of South Africa to be here. I thank and I welcome the representatives of various international organizations. Of course, the members and colleagues of the SASPEN governance structures, I also welcome and thank them for being here. And of course, I know that there are many acclaimed and very high-ranking social scientists and researchers amongst you. I welcome you as well. And those of you I have not covered, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. As the chair has mentioned, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation is a multifaceted or multi-faced organization. We have offices in all of our host countries and of course the Republic of South Africa being among them. Unfortunately, as the chair has mentioned, my colleague who is resident here in South Africa cannot be with us today. Fortunately, he has no symptoms, but he keeps testing negative. He would have loved to be in our midst, but of course he took the precaution not to expose himself and you obviously to his presence. So on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation South Africa, on behalf of the Zambian office, and of course the Zambian office is the key partner of SASPEN, and SASPEN's secretariat is hosted in Lusaka, and it is our office and work of myself and my colleagues to interact with the SASPEN secretariat closely. So on behalf of all of us, again, a warm welcome, and it's good to see you this morning. You seem to be very healthy, and I hope that stays that way. The Friedrich Ebert Foundation, I will not go much into who we are and what we do because time is not on our side this morning, but we are the German Foundation for Social Democracy. And as you might be able to judge from this headline, we are very much interested in social security and social protection. And we have been a long-term partner of SASPEN because we feel together it is quite a good attempt for us, a good effort for us to spread social protection throughout the Southern African region. Ladies and gentlemen, I will not give any points of substance because all of you in this room are probably much better experts when it comes to social protection than I am. And we have a long row of very esteemed and qualified speakers lined up. And so I will not take more of your time. Just permit me to make one final remark. SASPEN, as your network, is in a period of transition. The institutional support that Friedrich Ebert Foundation in Zambia has given to the SASPEN Secretariat will come to an end at the end of this current year. And the future of the Secretariat, as we speak, is not secured. It is not secured. There are some avenues that the Secretariat is pursuing and the governance structures of the network are pursuing, but the future is not secured. And SASPEN is a network, as I don't need to tell you. I mean, you've all responded, and there was very strong response to the call, to the invitation to this conference. And I believe that all of you are very competent and well-connected persons, and more support to secure the future of SASPEN and its governance structures and its secretariat is needed. So I hope that more support can be activated from your midst, can be accessed from your midst. And in that sense, after the end of our conference tomorrow afternoon, the Secretariat is going to host an informal meeting of people or institutions who would be able to render a helping hand, would be able to come in and render some support. And the SASPEN Secretariat, I mean, Susan will address us later, will conduct that meeting. So if you can be part of that meeting, if you have something to offer, please be part of this meeting tomorrow afternoon. Very finally, as you know, COVID is still with us, and as the winter has struck now the Southern Hemisphere and also the country that is hosting us, the numbers are going up again. That is not a good sign. We all need to be very wary, so I thank you, and I'd like to call upon you to be very disciplined in terms of wearing your mask, keeping distance whenever possible. And unfortunately, for formal reasons, I have to point out to you that if there are cases of COVID in your midst, we cannot be responsible for any ensuing costs or any ensuing efforts that need to be undertaken. So unfortunately, I need to remind you that you participate in this conference at your own risk when it comes to COVID. Ladies and gentlemen, with these sober remarks, I thank you once again for coming. A very warm welcome also on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and I wish us all a very fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kopsiker, for these important expressions on your side. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to latch on the last remark that Mr. Kopsiker made about the COVID-19 situation. We actually had an urgent meeting of the conference organizing committee last Thursday evening, late in the evening, to discuss what to do with what is starting to happen in South Africa, whether we shouldn't go virtually full-blown. And even since then, we then decided to keep this hybrid, but also to inform everybody about what's happening and what the risks are. So let us not take that lightly. 2 days ago, the positivity rate in this country was over 31%, which is of the highest the peak that we had previously, and the numbers are picking up. This is, so it seems, the fifth wave, driven by the two new variants, Omicron B4 and B5, which are even more contagious than the first Omicron wave. So we plead with you, and there will be an announcement made later by Susan as to what the protocols in this regard are. But we really plead with you to be careful. We only need one person who is or becomes sick, and this can become a spreader event, and we don't want to see that, please. So thank you for your cooperation. It then gives me really a pleasure to introduce to you our next person who will give welcome remarks. This is on behalf of the Department of Social Development in South Africa. This is the most prominent department in the area of social protection and social security in particular. The acting DG couldn't be here, but he is being represented by somebody whom we have always tried to draw in and bring to these conferences. She's so busy. Ms. Brenda Sebeko is the Deputy Director General responsible for this particular area of social security. I know Brenda for many, many years, and I always marvel at what she has achieved over the years, how she has been driving the social security portfolio, if I could use that word, on behalf of the department. Those of you who are from this country would know that they came up with a draft green paper some months ago with very important recommendations based on an expert panel report, which I believe she will talk to, which caused a lot of discussion in this country. But certainly the department, and also through Brenda in particular, they are at the forefront of where this country wants to go and should be going in terms of social security. So nobody better than Brenda Sebeko, Ms. Sebeko, to say a few welcome remarks on behalf of the government of South African Department of Social Development in particular. Thank you, Brenda. Over to you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Let me begin by saying it's an honor and a privilege to me to be able to stand on behalf of our Director General, Mr. Linton Chun. Obviously, I'm nothing like him. So I'm going to try as far as possible, because I'm standing in for him, to say what he would have said rather than what I would say. It's also helpful because it disciplines me not to talk for very long if I just stick to what he would have said instead. Firstly, let me acknowledge and greet the program directors, Ms. Susan Mlewa and Ms. Vince Chipatuka. I hope I'm saying the names correctly. Then the SASPEN BOT chairperson, Prof. Olivier, whom I've known forever. I think since I started my career in the social security environment, I've met and worked with him on different projects. Then the SASPEN, the FES, South Africa country director, and the Zambia country director, Mr. Kopsiger. Representative from the various international organizations and the UN agencies, government colleagues who are here, and representatives from various social security experts, networks, and civil society organizations. Greetings to you all, and anyone that I've excluded, esteemed colleagues, esteemed guests, good morning to you all. I'm privileged to be here. I've wanted to come many times. I know this is like the 6th, I think, conference. I've been missing them, but I have really been wanting to come. So it's good that today, at least, I had the excuse of being able to say I'm standing in for the DG, to be able to participate in this conference. I think it's a really important conference. The timing of it also is really important for us in South Africa, and I guess in the rest of the continent, because of the things that we're experiencing right now. I'm happy that you're having it here at home, because we in South Africa would like to share a lot of our experiences in this space and also hear from you what your experiences have been. The theme, as I understand, is what we did last year was social protection and social services in the SADC region, Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030. I don't know if you are aware, colleagues, if it has come to the front of your mind that we are less than 8 years away from 2030. And the Agenda 2030 is quite a big agenda. And I guess this is the time to take stock and say, how far are we and what do we still need to do to arrive at that? Because the chance of reaching 2063 agenda depend very much on how much progress we made towards the 2030 agenda. And I'm hoping that a lot of the engagements that will happen today will be about that. And the fact that the COVID interruption, in some ways, it has interrupted the agenda and the program, but in some ways, it might have helped the agenda. At least for us in South Africa, I think it has helped in some ways. So the impact of COVID on the world at large and our country specifically has been devastating, not only from the health perspective, but also from the economic perspective and from the social perspective, the isolation that people felt, something that is not so obvious and elevated to the extent that it should be. For somebody like myself working in the Department of Social Development, we realized that it wasn't only about social protection, the things that we want to talk about here, but also the human impact and the issues of violence and gender-based violence and emotional angst and stress that people have felt as a result of the economic fallout, job losses, deaths that happened. All of those things have had a very, very stressful impact on the countries, especially in the South, primarily because we were also starting from a low base. Our countries were already struggling with economic growth, with inclusion of people in the economy and so on. So when COVID hit, it really caused a lot of stress in various areas of our social protection systems. So we have learned a lot of lessons in the responses that different countries did. In South Africa, you are all aware, I think last year the DG shared what this country had done in terms of introducing a stimulus package that was not only focused on the social security and social protection, but also on economic, like protecting certain industries and helping business to weather the storms that were brought on by COVID. So as we're currently recovering, beginning to implement some of those stimulus package interventions that were introduced, which I will not speak to because they were shared with you before, I think the floods that now happened in KZN and the new devastation that we are now experiencing as a country as a result of the very significant, around 500 deaths, and the destruction that has happened there, and what is now going on in the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape in the country, has just elevated for us as South Africa the importance of social protection, the importance of social security and its provision, so that it improves the people's resilience and ability to bounce back after crises happen in their lives. So we have seen the Department of Social Development rising in its importance in terms of the work that it does. And we've seen ourselves under a lot of pressure to intervene, not only in terms of psychosocial support and all of those things, but also in helping people to then access social security and social protection benefits. So our country now is in the throes of a new crisis that we are now having to face head on. You know, for many years, social protection and social security experts have been saying, you know, we need to start looking at the interaction between economic growth, societal well-being, and climate change. And it's been something that's sort of there on the agenda on the side. But now in this country, especially, it's rising to become really important. It's something that I'm hoping, I don't necessarily see it specifically in the agenda and the program that you have. But I guess when you talk about building resilience, we'll have to say what are the contexts within which you need to build that resilience. And one of those must be climate change and its impact, especially on the poor, because those are the ones who experience the worst fallout, as the poor also experience the worst fallout from COVID. So in our country, what we did with regard to the 2030 agenda, you are aware that that has been localized into our National Development Plan, and we've tried to move in that direction. One of the biggest advantages, I mean, you don't expect necessarily that people will talk about an advantage when you talk about COVID, but the advantage for us was that it raised an agenda item that had been put on the back burner for many years. In 2002, Professor Olivier was part of a Taylor Committee of Inquiry into a Comprehensive Social Security System. He was one of the people that was leading the work in that regard. And a key proposal that they made in terms of how to extend and expand our social protection system was that we should introduce a basic income grant for everyone in the country. That proposal at that time didn't win a lot of favor, at least not within government, and therefore it never got implemented. So the onset of COVID created a platform for that to be raised again. Our minister became the minister who says, can we reconsider that? Because we realized that the resilience of the South African population was not where it needed to be when COVID happened. And of course, you know about the introduction of the Social Relief of Distress Grant, which I will not go into because Isabel, I think, is going to be talking about it at some stage during the conference. But for us, it became a platform to start saying, let us revisit this thing. Let us think about what would have happened if it was already in place, the extent to which people would have been able to survive and you know, the system that we had in place. We were able to use in a way to introduce the SRD grant. But there was a lot of difficulty in implementation because we had not built that basic income grant beforehand. We had to do very quickly things that would not normally be done, of course, helped by the state of disaster that was declared. But now, in this year, we are very happy that the president decided to extend it for another year, that social relief of distress. And for us, what we are trying to motivate is that that should become a step towards the introduction of income support for everyone in the country. The South African social security system is very well known. It's very broad. It covers quite a large proportion of the population. You all know this. But the biggest gap has always been people who are unemployed between the age of 19 and 59. We just didn't cover them. Because the expectation was that you will sell your labor and that's how you'll get income. But in a country that has had structural unemployment since I can remember, that has not been something that could be achieved. So when COVID hit, we had to then say, what do we do about those people who were, like, you know, eking out a livelihood for themselves in very difficult spaces and irregular incomes and so on? What do we do for them? How do we make sure that they also are able to survive COVID? And so we are praying and fighting as DSD, and I'm hoping that the experts in this room will also be doing that kind of work of motivating for ensuring universal coverage of social security for everybody. If you don't have social protection, you don't have resilience. And although the people who worry about the economy might say it's too expensive, my view, and I hope this is the view that is shared by many people here, is that it's more expensive not to provide. Because the impact on the economy when a large proportion of the population is not covered, is not able to deal with risk, is worse. So I'm hoping that these are some of the things that will be dealt with in this program, that we will really be debating about how do we make sure that we can show governments, we can motivate governments by different experiences that we have had to say the COVID experience is motivation for us to say, let us not find ourselves in the same space again when another crisis occurs, because I can bet another crisis is going to come. And the ones that are going to come in the future will be climate change, and we'll see that it will be the most vulnerable who are unable to cope. So we need to be saying, what is the important foundation that we can be creating as nations, as the continent of Africa? How can we work together to make sure that we do these things that enable us to to build resilient societies, to provide for our communities, but also to ensure that our economies grow. The economies cannot grow when a large proportion of the population is excluded from economic activity. And income support and participation in social protection is part of that. And social protection, of course, is not just the grants, which is what we talk about a lot in South Africa. There's also the contributory side. There's also voluntary systems. There's also other aspects, water, sanitation, access to those things, access to school, to health, to education, and so forth. And I think that this is the group of experts that are here are best placed to be providing the information, to be providing the motivation, to be making the argument for why this should be built for the whole of Africa. And I hope that when we debate today, we will first say, for 2030, where are we? How far do we need to go? What are the things that we need to do in order to persuade governments to at least fight for reaching the targets of 2030? South Africa is starting to assess that already, and we see that we are not as close as we need to be. And that's what is the fact that it's in our national development plan is helping us to be able to make the motivation. But I'm hoping that other countries will do the same. As I conclude, I will not say, I actually try to stick to what the DG would have said. I just want to put a challenge to you. These conferences have been happening for a couple of years, and I hope to, in the future, attend more. But I think we really need to think about how to elevate the work and how to popularize it more. Like the outcome of this conference, there needs to be some way of popularizing it, not only here in South Africa, but in other parts of the continent, so that we can begin to get governments to talk about these things and to understand that it's not just a small niche department that thinks these are important, but that we widen the argument and the motivation and the active social marketing of social protection as a very important contributor to sustainable development, not only on the continent, but beyond the world. And I'm hoping that I will be able to stay for quite a bit to learn some of the things that the other countries have been doing. But I want to wish everyone here a very fruitful, engaging conference. And I hope that the outcome will not just be another document, but that we'll move beyond that and sell the document, market the document. Hopefully FES can also begin to assist in that regard in the social marketing of the work that comes out of this platform, so that we popularize it and we get more people to engage and motivate for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Baker or Brenda, for, as always, your very inspiring words. And we do take note of some of the important issues that you have referred to. If you listen carefully, you have picked up the importance that she stressed of venturing into areas of social protection, yet has to make its proper mark. Climate change is an issue. We debated it also a year or two ago to say that, you know, there are serious shortcomings in the social protection response in relation to climate change also, and particularly in this continent. Also the focus on elevating and popularizing what we are doing. Yes, we should certainly do as much as we can. Currently, we use policy briefs as one way of popularizing the outcomes of this conference, and you will be contacted by the Secretariat after this conference, those of you presenting, to ask whether you would be interested in to prepare a policy brief. And a few have already been developed and are in the process of being developed based on the last 2 years of conference, but very important issue that as well. The impact on the continent, the policy work, extremely important. I can only confirm and stress what she has been saying. Now, before I ask the next speaker, this will be Susan Malewa, our coordinator, to briefly take us through the program, to announce a few house rules and the like. Let me just say a few things that as I said at the beginning, I also say this on behalf of the Board of Trustees, that we're so thankful for everybody who's here, and to probably be a bit more specific, of course, the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, our two colleagues from Zambia, Mr. Kopseker and Vince, the DGG, and one of the chief directors in the Department of Social Development, Mr. Anthony Makwiramiti, who is no stranger here. He has been with us in a number of the last few conferences. There are a couple of international organizations. I'm not sure how many of them are here physically or virtually at the moment, but among others, I know the ILO Geneva and Pretoria will be presenting on different occasions in the conference. The FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the UNDP, and if I've missed any, my apology for that. But then also the SASPEN governing structures. We have a number of board of directors present or virtually present, a board of trustees the same, and the broader advisory panel of experts who advise us on the work that we are doing. I want to say also a particular word of thanks at this stage already. We'll say more about that tomorrow, to the program directors, Susan Malewa and Mr. Vince Chipatuka, but in particular for the Secretariat for the massive effort that I've put in practically, logistically and planning wise to make this happen. This whole team of them, we will, in the course of today, tomorrow, officially introduce them to you also tomorrow, when we thank everybody for the hard work that went into this. And together with that, of course, the conference organizing committee, as was already mentioned, for all your particular inputs. But then I want to say really that this conference is about social protection, given our specific theme, social protection at a crossroads between COVID-19 and the SDGs, Southern African perspectives. So it's about social protection in and for the region. And because that is the case, it's also about us all, about you. You will be presenting, will be participating, especially if you will be speaking, but also those of you who will be chairing. We really value your inputs. We have seen the abstracts. We are impressed with what we received from you. We are looking forward to listening to you and learning from you, and see how all of what you are saying could translate in a stronger evidence base for the development of social protection, policy-wise, advocacy-wise, and otherwise in the SADC region. I want to thank in particular also our keynote speaker, who will be addressing us after this session, Professor Stephen Devereaux. You just have to mention his name in the continent, and there's nobody working in social protection in Africa that wouldn't know the name of Stephen. All the effort he put in to help develop the concept note and his inputs today and tomorrow as well. We also have a number of other, I call them introductory speakers or other keynote speakers today and tomorrow. To them as well, our thanks. But in all the other speakers, also those who will be presenting posters, so to say, all of this is extremely important, and we're looking forward to your inputs. Tonight at the gala dinner, Susan will say a bit more about the activities and the program of SASPEN, what we have been doing also in the last year, and perhaps a bit of a futuristic perspective. So I'm not going to say more about that, other than to highlight that SASPEN is all about, in the first place, partnerships, about evidence-based policy and advocacy work, about proper research, but as I've said, to inform policy and advocacy. So you will hear tonight of a recently completed OSISA regional social protection research project. We provide a supportive role for many institutions and governments in the region, and it has been our privilege to do so, amongst others through country workshops. But we all in all, we remain an independent organization. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do what we are doing. Yes, we are facing a new dispensation as from next year, as you already heard. We are thankful for the fact that the FAS Zambia indicated that it could still provide some program support. We are really thankful for that. We're looking at alternatives for institutional support, and we're also developing a new legal framework for SASPEN for reasons we don't need to discuss now. So interesting, challenging times, but certainly much that lies ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege then to call upon the coordinator, network coordinator, Ms. Susan Malewa, to address us briefly on the program, which I'm told hard copy will be available soon, and also on some house rules. Susan, over to you. Thank you.
Good morning, delegates. Allow me to say all protocol observed. And I have the pleasure on behalf of the Board of Directors and Trustees to invite you to the 9th International Annual SASPEN Conference this year in partnership with FES. So I will quickly go straight into the program framework that we have prepared for this year. And the theme is social protection at a crossroads between COVID-19 and the SDGs. We will be looking at Southern African perspectives, and we have dissected this year's theme into 7 sub-themes. So in summary, we will be looking back at social protection interventions that different governments put into place to respond to the impacts of COVID-19. And we will be consolidating the gains of these interventions. So we will be taking stock of what's been happening at national level. And we will also be assessing enablers and development approaches with regards to social protection interventions responding to COVID-19. And we will also be revisiting the mix of social protection, looking at alternatives, looking at traditional approaches, looking at the current responses and how they were expanded to respond to COVID-19 and how best we can be innovative in our approaches moving forward. And lastly, we will be integrating gender with regards to gender mainstreaming, as well as focusing on the inclusion of marginalized groups, inclusive of youth, older persons, migrants, and other vulnerable groups that we have in society. Then an important aspect that did emerge in the different impact assessments with regards to social protection interventions is the sustainability and domestic financing of in advancing the role of social protection. And lastly, to conclude, we will be looking ahead towards the SDGs. Of course, we would not want to leave anyone behind. This also applies to the progress that the different governments and nations are making with regards to ensuring we meet the SDGs. It was mentioned by Brenda that we only have 8 years. So the leave no one behind needs to ensure that in Southern Africa, we are at we cannot be at the same pace, of course, but at least we are moving in the same line and we are speaking the same language to ensure that we attain this goal. So we will have a concluding panel, and the purpose of the concluding panel is to get a sense of recommendations that will emerge from the different discussions we'll have in the next 2 days, as well as look at possible partnerships and how we can achieve this work moving forward. So it is a 1.5 day program, the whole of today, as well as a half day tomorrow. We plan at ending at 1:30, just before lunch. And as was mentioned by Marius, we do plan on having an engagement meeting. This is a really short engagement meeting with prospect partners in the room who would like to support SASPEN moving forward with how we can continue with such engagements in the future. So that is on the program. Allow me to now move on to housekeeping issues. As you all know, the COVID situation has been accelerating the past 2 weeks in South Africa. And we would like to ensure that we keep you safe as our conference delegates. And we have assigned a COVID-19 protocol officer. Chilashe, may you kindly raise your hand? So that is Chilashe. She is the designated protocol officer. So any COVID-19 related issues with regards to information, with regards to symptoms, if you're not feeling well, please notify Chilashe. And from time to time, we will be asking to take temperature and just ensure that we have everything in place and no one is not feeling unwell. So I will quickly go through a few key protocols that we've put in place. You do have a copy in front of you, but I'll just like to make mention that we do have masks available and we are encouraging you to change your masks frequently after every break. And also we are, of course, this is a networking event, but we do ask that we ensure we keep to social distancing as we are interacting, even during lunchtime. So if you would like to interact with someone during lunch and you note that the table is full, we do encourage that at least you are 2 people seated on the table at least, just to ensure the social distancing is maintained. And lunches will be served in the fresh restaurant and the dinners as well, where we've been having our breakfast. And if you are screened and your temperature is above 32 degrees, we will ask you to wait outside so we can retake your temperature. And if your temperature remains above the accepted normal rate, we will need to isolate you in your room and you will have to follow the sessions virtually. And then also, as you have noticed, we are sanitizing the microphones after every speaker, so that will continue throughout the conference. And also, there are COVID-19 testing facilities available for delegates that will need to have that done. So do get in touch with Chilashe between today and tomorrow to ensure you do get this done on time before you depart back to your countries. And once the session has started, you are directed to use only the back exit. This is to avoid unnecessary disturbances. And also we are trying to ensure that we keep time. So we have a timekeeper in front of us who will be showing you how much time you have left. We have a countdown approach just to ensure that you keep to time. And finally, we have conference assistants in the room. They are wearing the SASPEN t-shirts. I do not have a t-shirt, so I decided to wear a blue dress, so I'm easily identifiable. And I do hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And just to mention, we will have a photo session at the tea break after the keynote session. So allow me to officially welcome both the physical and virtual participants, and we do hope that the next 2 days will be engaging for you. For the physical participants, we do have a networking dinner in the evening, and I would just like to encourage all of you to come in your best dressed outfits, and if possible, any traditional outfits or any outfits that represent the countries that you come from. I will give a bit more detail, but we would like the delegates that come from specific countries to group and think around interesting informal social protection interventions that happened in your country last year that you would like to share with everyone at the networking dinner. But I will give more detail at the end of the day, what we do expect with regards to the program we have planned out for you. So this is just to help you start brainstorming as country groups on what you'd like to share at the dinner. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm confidentially informed that tonight will be a very special event. But hear more about SASPEN, but apparently there are interesting things in the pipeline now. I believe that Susan, will you tell more about that later today? And it will be chaired by Mr. Taku Fundira. Where's Taku? Yeah, but in any event, he will be our chair. Ladies and gentlemen, Susan mentioned the colleagues who wear the SASPEN shirts. So we have, in the first place, the broader secretariat. It's Susan, Naka, and Chiles, but also the others, colleagues who are helping us. Perhaps I'll just ask you just to stand up so that you can all see who they are. And if you have any problem, issue, question, you are in very capable hands. So for the moment, you can see who they are. While I was sitting here, I realized that, or I saw that something very important has arrived. And in fact, as I speak, they are now being distributed to you. That is the popular program. And you can see how much work went into that, also then by the Secretariat. So now we have a physical copy. We are far behind time. We have to make this up somehow. And I'm going to ask the chairs of the next sessions to see whether we can help to achieve that purpose. And we may also have to cut into some of our tea times and lunchtime because we don't want to end too late today. So it is then therefore my privilege to ask the chair of the next session, Dr. Mildred Mushunye, she's actually will be chairing the next two sessions. Again, there was a connectivity problem with the colleague, the Board of Trustee member, Professor Ngai Kanyogolo, who was supposed to chair this next session. So Dr. Mildred Mushunye will stand in. Mildred, all over to you. Can I invite you to come forward and to take the chair, please, Mildred? Thank you to all our welcome speakers. Welcome, President Speaker.
So good morning once again, colleagues. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be chairing this session. So by way of introduction, we know that COVID-19 has wrought unprecedented havoc on all of us, individual, family, work, community levels, and so on. And it has also put to the test the efficacy of our social protection programs. We saw when COVID started, we saw some countries being able to provide for their citizens various kind of support. We heard from South Africa, the kind of mechanisms that were put in place. We witnessed the loss of jobs, livelihoods, an increase in gender-based violence, and general recognition that there was so much that needed to be done, that can still be done in terms of social protection. So it's my pleasure, therefore, to be facilitating this session where we're going to have a keynote presentation from a very renowned scholar. It's always a pleasure to interact with him. He's an extraordinary professor at the Institute of Social Development, University of the Western Cape, where he holds a DSI NRIF research chair, and I will ask that you explain to us what that is. In social protection for food security, He's also affiliated to the Center of Excellence in Food Security. He's also Professor of Development Studies at the UK Institute of Development Studies, co-director of the Center for Social Protection, and Mercator Fellow at the Sociam Research Center on Inequality and Social Policy, University of Bremen. So allow me, colleagues, to welcome Professor Stephen Devereux to the podium to give us his keynote address. And you're welcome to clap as he makes his way here.
Chair, for that very kind introduction. I think you took most of my 20 minutes, though. Good morning, delegates, and let me get away with saying all protocols observed. It's a great honor, really, to be invited by SASPEN to give this keynote address. I've been an enthusiastic supporter of SASPEN since the very beginning, and yes, long may it thrive. It's doing great work. So the title for my keynote this morning, which is going to be an old-fashioned speech. I usually do lots of PowerPoints, but today I thought let's do a speech, old style. So the title is, what was COVID-19 good or bad for social protection? Of course, with a particular focus on Southern Africa. In order to look forward, we must first look back. I don't know if that's a proverb, but maybe it is now. So I want to start with a very brief overview of the recent history of social protection in Africa before focusing on the COVID-19 period since 2020 in Southern Africa. Informal and community-based social protection have existed in Africa for centuries, and European-style social welfare and social insurance were introduced during the colonial period. But the current wave of social protection as a development policy discourse arrived in Africa in the late 1990s. Some middle-income countries, like here in South Africa, built on what was already in place, like when the state maintenance grant became the child support grant in 1998 and expanded to become the single biggest social assistance scheme in Africa. In many lower-income countries in Africa, social protection as an idea was largely imported by the international development community and then later institutionalized, as I will explain. But it started out with financial and technical assistance from bilateral donors like DFID and GIZ, multilateral donors like the European Union, United Nations agencies like UNICEF and ILO, and multilateral financial institutions like the World Bank. Okay, so let's look at the pre-pandemic period from inception to institutionalization, or 1900 to 1920. In my view, the history of social protection in Africa in this period can be divided into 4 overlapping phases: inception, expansion, consolidation, and institutionalization. The inception phase in the early 2000s was dominated by donor-funded pilot projects that were designed to demonstrate the effectiveness of social cash transfers as a poverty alleviation and risk management instrument. One of the first examples, and maybe the most famous, of this new wave of social protection in the region was the Colombo District's social cash transfer project in Zambia, initiated in 2002 by the government of Zambia with the German agency GTZ. The lessons from this pilot program were vigorously promoted, both within Africa and to neighboring countries, including through cross-country learning initiatives like the Regional Hunger and Vulnerability Program, which some of you might remember. Within a few years, almost every country in the region had introduced cash transfer schemes targeting poor and vulnerable groups. During the expansion phase, the number of programs and beneficiaries increased dramatically within and across countries. Another indicator of the rapid expansion of social protection was the number of countries that had a national social protection policy or strategy. In the year 2000, this number was 0. Not a single country in Africa, in the whole of Africa, had a social protection policy. By 2010, only 5 countries had one, but by 2015, this had risen to 27 countries, and by 2020, 35 countries had a national social protection policy. In other words, almost 2/3 of all countries in the continent. Nonetheless, by the early 2000s, as I said, there were only 5 countries that had a policy by 2010. By the early 2010s, there were fears that the momentum behind social protection was declining and that it might even fade away and be replaced by a different development policy agenda. But in 2012, UNICEF published its Social Protection Strategic Framework, the World Bank published its Social Protection and Labor Strategy, and the International Labour Conference voted to adopt the ILO's recommendation on national social protection laws. International interest was actually stronger than ever, and UNICEF, the World Bank, and ILO pushed social protection higher up their development assistance portfolios, even though each had very different visions and objectives for social protection. But that's another story. In many African countries, social protection consolidated itself by evolving from donor-funded pilot projects to government-run national programs, and from standalone programs to integrated systems. It also strengthened its linkages to other social sectors like education and health, as well as to productive sectors and income-generating activities through graduation model or economic inclusion programs that combine social assistance with support to livelihoods. This more holistic approach is sometimes called social protection plus. Also during the 2010s, social protection in Africa moved into its institutionalization phase. This started with governments assuming more responsibility for managing and financing those social protection projects that had come in from the donor community, as development partners started to scale down their direct support. Some governments passed laws that made social protection rights-based and established social protection ministries, departments, and agencies to administer social protection programs. Institutionalization also involved substantial investments in building more efficient social protection systems, such as single registries for beneficiary management and complaint response mechanisms for social accountability. Okay, so that's enough history. Let's go to the pandemic and the phase that I call shock response. Despite this, despite this impressive progress, by the time COVID-19 arrived in Africa in early 2020, the process of consolidating and institutionalizing social protection as a national policy was only partly complete, and social assistance schemes were still weakly embedded in many countries. The what-if question was still being asked. What will happen to social protection in country X or country Y if international development partners withdraw their financial assistance and technical support? So when COVID-19 arrived, it presented enormous challenges for social protection, actually not only in Africa, but throughout the world. But it also created enormous opportunities. COVID-19 lockdowns created a surge in the demand or the need for social protection because lockdowns had the unprecedented effect of pushing hundreds of millions of working people across the world into involuntary unemployment for several months. Two major arguments always made by governments that are resistant to social protection did not apply to COVID-19. This is an important point. The first is that providing social protection to working-aged adults would create dependency syndrome, meaning that they will be disincentivized from working or looking for work, preferring to survive on free handouts from the state. This argument was, of course, irrelevant during COVID-19 lockdowns when people were prevented from working by government regulations. They could not choose whether to work or not to work. The second complaint about social protection, that it is unaffordable in low-income countries, also lost traction during COVID-19. Governments had created a livelihoods crisis that they were compelled to address. They simply had to find the money to protect their poorer citizens against destitution and starvation, and to varying degrees they did. In fact, most governments in Africa provided social assistance in various forms to their COVID-19 affected populations. These interventions included, firstly, horizontal or vertical expansion of existing social assistance schemes. Horizontal expansion meant adding new beneficiaries to existing schemes using existing and established platforms for targeting, registration, and payments. Vertical expansion meant increasing the benefits paid to existing beneficiaries of social assistance schemes for the duration of the pandemic. These are, in fact, the two main mechanisms of so-called shock responsive social protection. And they represent the consolidation of a growing trend in recent years, namely the harmonization of emergency humanitarian relief and developmental social protection through the use of common platforms for registering and paying beneficiaries. So we're seeing these two agendas coming together under COVID-19 conditions. The second set of interventions was around establishing new social assistance schemes, such as here in South Africa, the Temporary Employer-Employee Relief Scheme, TERS, and the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant that the DGG already referred to. It is notable, in fact, that almost all countries in Southern Africa introduced emergency cash transfer programs during 2020 in response to the huge gap in social protection provision that was exposed by COVID-19 in countries across the world. Namely, the lack of protection for low-income working adults, especially self-employed and informal sector workers who do not qualify for unemployment insurance. This is precisely the population cohort that was impacted most severely by COVID-19 lockdowns, and the recognition of this gap is one reason why COVID-19 was in fact good for social protection. It drew attention to a major problem. On the other hand, an important distinction must be drawn between social protection and humanitarian responses. If governments or agencies give COVID-affected people cash, food, or vouchers only once or twice, in my view, that is humanitarian relief, even if social protection platforms were used for registration and targeting. Two defining characteristics of social protection are that it should be regular and predictable. Occasional or ad hoc transfers during a crisis do not meet this standard. Moving on, the third set of interventions was around more efficient delivery mechanisms. And this was dominated by an accelerated transition from manual to electronic or digital payments. In Eswatini, for instance, old age grants were collected manually before COVID-19, but electronic payments were introduced in 2020 using mobile money apps. This shift was a response to the closure of government offices and the need to eradicate queuing and overcrowding at post offices in order to comply with mobility restrictions and social distancing protocols. In other countries too, digitalization has become a priority component of the institutionalization of social protection in recent years. And the fourth area of intervention was around strengthening the institutional framework for delivering social protection. Some countries used COVID-19 as a reminder that their policy framework for social protection needed to be updated. In Eswatini, the government reviewed and revised its national social assistance policy and accelerated the implementation of the national social security policy with plans to establish a national pension fund and a national health insurance fund, as well as workers' compensation. In Botswana, the government established a national social protection framework in 2020. In his State of the Nation address in November 2020, the president of Botswana endorsed these proposals. Here is an extract from the president's speech. He said, and I quote, "The recently approved National Social Protection Framework will deliver a single registry system with the aim of consolidating and harmonizing the existing 29 social protection programs across government into 5 life course programs. This consolidation will assist government in building a stronger, more responsive, efficient, and resilient social protection system." So in all of these ways, COVID-19 was good for social protection. COVID-19 served as a focusing event, drawing attention to the need for countries to extend the coverage and close gaps in their social protection systems and to strengthen the institutional foundations of their delivery. Ongoing processes such as the digitalization of payments and the harmonization of humanitarian relief and longer-term social protection were validated and accelerated. In my opinion, in fact, I would say that social protection and Zoom are the two biggest winners from COVID-19. But will it last? One way of assessing whether COVID-19 was good for social protection in the country is whether any interventions that were introduced in response were long-term or even permanent. In Eswatini, the shift to electronic payment of old age grants started during COVID-19, as I mentioned, but it continued after lockdowns were lifted and has become normalized. This is surely an improvement in the administration of the old age grants in Eswatini. In South Africa, civil society has campaigned vigorously for the temporary COVID-19 social relief of distress grant to become a permanent basic income support grant, filling the social protection gap for 18 to 59-year-olds. And I should say that the DSD is strongly behind this campaign. And in fact, the government has already responded by extending this temporary grant until March 2023, and the perception is growing that it has become politically irreversible. Okay, so let's conclude by looking at the road ahead, the post-pandemic phase. As DDG reminded us, there are now only 8 years until the SDG deadline of 2030. How many countries will achieve the SDG social protection targets? It all depends on what governments choose to prioritize right now and in the next year or two. Will they take the high road or the low road, remembering that we are at a crossroads? The ILO's latest World Social Protection Report, in fact, is subtitled Social Protection at a Crossroads. It argues that the period immediately after COVID-19 has the potential either to push social protection forward to the next level or to reverse recent gains, according to the policy choices governments decide to make. The ILO report defines the high road as follows, and I quote, "Countries can use the policy window prized open by the pandemic and build on their crisis response measures to strengthen their social protection systems and progressively close protection gaps. This would involve increased efforts to build universal, comprehensive, adequate, and sustainable social protection systems, including a social protection floor that guarantees at least a basic level of social security for all over the course of their lives." I thought that's worth quoting because that is a great vision for social protection. And similarly, UNDP has proposed an SDG push, by which they mean an integrated policy package that includes investments in social protection, digitalization, improved governance, and green economy to bounce back quickly from the COVID-19 pandemic and get back on track towards achieving the SDGs. This would require increased spending on social assistance programs, which is potentially feasible due to that focusing effect of COVID-19 that I mentioned, and the recognition that countries with comprehensive and well-functioning social protection systems survived lockdowns better than those without. If SDG push proposals are implemented, UNDP estimates that SDG targets for poverty reduction could be achieved faster than if there was no COVID at all. Against these positive arguments in favor of increased investment in social protection, however, several factors could push African governments towards following a low road instead. Most importantly, the heavy unplanned expenditure on COVID-19 responses and the reduced economic growth that all countries experienced in 2020 and 2021 has already resulted in fiscal contraction and cutbacks in social spending across the world. One study estimates that 85% of the global population are now living in austerity conditions. At such times, social spending is always cut more severely than spending on other sectors. Another unforeseen event that we can't ignore is, of course, the war in Ukraine, which is also creating shockwaves throughout the global economy, raising food prices and fuel prices and triggering a cost of living crisis even in high-income countries. Again, this could trigger even deeper social spending cuts and austerity measures, even though an expansionist or Keynesian fiscal response might be more appropriate, involving more social protection spending rather than less. I want to conclude by underlining the enormous strides that social protection has made throughout our region in the last 20 years. There is no doubt that millions of people across Southern Africa are better off now, thanks to the introduction and expansion of social protection. This is an outstanding and probably unique event in recent policy history. However, at least three serious challenges remain. Firstly, coverage of social protection remains unacceptably low. Only 17% of people in Africa are receiving at least one social protection benefit, compared to 47% globally. In some countries, national programs now reach all districts, giving the illusion of national coverage, but not everyone who needs assistance in each district is reached. No one should be left behind. The second challenge, benefits paid by social assistance schemes are generally low and usually inadequate to meet basic needs. Until recently, the focus of policy advocacy has been on increasing coverage, but comprehensive social protection has two pillars: universal access and adequate benefits. We need to start pushing for adequacy of benefits. And finally, the third challenge, social protection is not yet rights-based in most African countries. A social contract urgently needs to be established whereby citizens or residents as claim holders can hold governments accountable as duty bearers to realize their right to social protection or social security for all. In the absence of a justiciable right to social protection, programs and benefits are highly vulnerable to being cut back when a new government takes power or during economic crises. So to finish, most of us are attending this conference, I assume, because we believe in social protection as a policy that improves the well-being of poor and vulnerable people. We all need to advocate and campaign for three things: extend the coverage of social protection programs, raise the benefits, and ensure that social protection becomes rights-based everywhere. Most important of all, in this critical moment, we need to campaign for governments to take the high road, to invest more in social protection, to consolidate the gains made during the COVID-19 pandemic, and to drive this momentum forward towards achieving the social protection SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Devereaux. We have about 10 minutes to engage with him. And just bearing in mind the last 3 points that he raised around the coverage of social protection still being very low, the inadequacy of the benefits, and that is still not rights-based. There's so much work going on around currently by different organizations and different agencies around creating accountability frameworks where we can hold our governments accountable. So I'm going to open this up for us to interact with the professor, and I can see a hand straight away at the back. Please just very brief, tell us your name and you pose your question. I'll take one hand, second. Yes, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Richard Rory.
You need to use the mic so that those that are online can hear you. Please come to the front. Could you also just come up? Yeah.
I thought this was we were listening. Good morning, everyone. My name is Richard Rory. Prof, that was a super presentation. Allow me to pick on the issue of that it was an opportunity for many of the African countries. And even before the issue of the opportunity, Prof, the dilemma was real. The question was, do we top up on those ones that are receiving? Or do we horizontally bring more people on board, especially the new vulnerable? It was an opportunity because for many countries, and I come from Kenya, there were benefits that the government had never thought of, particularly an employment benefit. COVID-19 created an opportunity, and when we submitted a cabinet memo seeking consideration for the creation of an unemployment benefit, the cabinet approved. It only said as long as the government's bit of the contribution is not there. But the government finally said there is a need to look at coming up with this benefit. The other thing, and again, in terms of opportunity, there has always been talk of countries ratifying Convention 102, ILO Convention 102 in 1952. Now with COVID-19, very many, when you look at the African countries, most of them in the contributory pension schemes, they are in long-term, old age, survivor, and invalidity. But now countries are saying, hey, we need also to think about short-term benefits. And therefore, to many actually, well, was it a curse or a blessing? Either way, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. And if there's anybody else, please do raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you.
Thanks very much.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor. My name is Tumani. I'm particularly interested in the historical background of the social protection, particularly in the Southern African context. I think sometimes as scholars, we tend to exist what is here and now, but I'm happy that the Prof seeks to send us back in order to look forward. In fact, I would argue that we seriously and honestly take to task the question of history. Because if we do not deal with that, then we are missing a mark. We're not going to make any serious impact. Part of which, even within the culture of scholarship in South Africa, in Africa at large, who is leading this scholarship? You must ask this question. Because I assume, and I'm of the firm view that some of the people who are leading the scholarship are in fact the beneficiaries of a deadly history. And that history is it's a brutal history against the African people. And I argue that in fact, this crisis that today we call the social protection crisis, that requires high educated people to talk about, and yet those whom are deeply affected are not part of this discussion. None of us here are coming from Kobo. None of us here are coming from Tata. None of us here are coming from the deep rural of Swaziland, Botswana, Zambia. High scholars are here. And that's a big problem of scholarship. 3 minutes. Thank you.
No, not for you.
Oh,
the whole session.
Okay. All right. Now, my parting point, I'm saying, therefore, that this crisis that we are talking about in South Africa, particular, is a human-made. It's a human-made. It was deliberately made. 100 years and 9 wars in South Africa. Brutal killing of black people, deprivation of African people from participating in the economic goals, whether you're talking about colonialism, you're talking about apartheid. Apartheid architects and the beneficiaries of apartheid are still in South Africa today. They're not affected by this crisis. Yet those who are affected today are in queues, long queues. You go to Mthatha, you go to the whole Eastern Cape. But I'm saying we need to talk about this history of brutal killing of African people. And Professor Sapir Terbranch, just 1 point.
Yeah.
Professor Sapir Terbranch deals openly with this history. And then he says that up until particularly white South Africans, or white people generally in Africa, must come out honestly to say they made this crisis, right? If we are not calling out a spade, we will then doing a disservice to this conference as to say, what are the causes of this problem that we are confronting today? Question of social protection. Our government, I'm happy that the acting Deputy Director General is here. Our government is stuck. It's stuck now. It does not know what to do because they themselves are running away from this historical reality, which is our past. Because now you can't, ma'am, to be honest with you, you cannot have people who were excluded systematically from political participation and only be told in 1994, no, goes, the doors of democracy are open. And yet those people have no social and economic skills. And of course, as part of our presentation, we will highlight this thing as to what is happening in Cape Town and people who are homeless and are sleeping in the streets, struggling with this question of unemployment. And they've been struggling even before COVID. This is why I'm very excited when Prof talk about history, because this thing was beyond COVID. Therefore, the concentration on COVID as if COVID created this problem is a myth. And as scholars, we must demystify that myth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we have exactly now, I think, 2 minutes. And I'm going to ask that, Naka, you have a question?
Online.
Sorry?
Questions from online.
From online?
Yes.
Okay, so let's allow the participants from the online group to pose their questions.
Okay, this question is from Isabel Fry. How does Professor see the challenge of informal work rather than traditional contributions from employers, workers, and the state? So we only have one question so far.
Thank you so much. And I saw 2 hands. Please do come up and please be brief. And I think this will be the last 2. Oh, so it's just 1. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My question to...
Please tell us your name.
I'm Sandra Patasara from Zimbabwe. My question is around informal social protection and social security system. That in your, outlining your history, have you come across issues around that? Because I'm realizing that, especially in disaster context, for instance, we had Cyclone Ida in Zimbabwe, and then COVID. Informal networks have been very important. Are there systems where we can be able to see convergences between state-led and the informal systems that exist? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to invite online. I think we'll indulge the online because I'm sure it's very difficult logging on. And so when they do, we appreciate.
Okay. This is a question from Gift Dafulea. Stephen, should we merge social assistance and emergence assistance?
Thank you so much. We do have people taking photographs. I hope that is okay with all of us. If you are vehemently opposed to having your photograph taken, please just indicate and we'll refrain from taking your photograph. And also, SASPEN does have social media handles, and I will ask during the tea break to have the handles put up there. We'll just run with the hashtag social protection at Crossroads. So please do send out tweets, do make us visible on social media. Let me invite Professor to respond to the issues raised.
Thank you very much for those very interesting questions. Okay. I'll take them in the order they were asked. First, Richard, excuse me, Richard from Kenya gave us some very interesting examples of what's happening in Kenya, in another country. Excuse me. And I think that this dilemma of whether with a fixed budget, do you rather top up existing beneficiaries or do you extend coverage to new beneficiaries? And this was a particular challenge during the period of COVID-19 lockdowns. Of course, it's not either or. We should be doing both. And fortunately, because of the expansion of spending that happened for those 2 years, this did, and in fact, occur. There was increased spending on existing beneficiaries to help them survive the crisis. And there was also the addition of new beneficiaries onto existing systems and new programs being set up altogether. But the other point that Richard raised, which I think is really important, is about the ratification of Convention 102, the 1952 Minimum Standards on Social Security Convention. And yes, it's very important that governments do ratify that, but also that they then operationalize and implement it. You know, many governments sign things in international forums, go home and nothing happens. And what we need to look at is those other contingencies. There are 9 contingencies in that convention. It's not just about unemployment and old age or pensions, or even disability. It's also about health insurance, survivor benefits, sickness leave, maternity cover, all of these, workers' compensation, all of these things need to be included in our conceptualization and operationalization of social protection. We tend to focus very much on social assistance and on cash transfers. That's only one small part of the social protection agenda. So another part that needs to be urgently developed is that bigger set of contingencies that's recognized in Convention 102. Glumani made a very important point about the need to learn from history. And I've spent quite a lot of time at the beginning looking at the history of social protection, at least since 2000, because I felt that we take a few things for granted and we risk making the same mistakes. But actually, we still have a long way to go with social protection in Africa and in this region. And we need to learn what happened in the last 20 years. We also need to learn what happened in the previous 100 and 200 years. Yes, that's all very important as contextualization for where we are now. But let's take those lessons and move forward. And yes, let's learn from the people that are affected by crisis and poverty and hunger, and not just experts like us, so-called experts. They are the real experts. We are just one small fraction of that. Okay, so I should move on. Isabel asked about the challenge of informal work, Isabel Fry, challenge of informal work, rather than depending on contributions from the state. How can people in the informal sector get access to unemployment insurance if they're not part of a formal relationship with an employer who's going to pay contributions, and then the state adds their contributions? That is a real challenge. Most social insurance, like unemployment insurance and pension funds, are tripartite funded: employee, employer, and the state. If you're an informal worker, there's no employer who's going to make contributions for you. You don't have access to the state. And that's where we need to look at innovative hybrid models. And there are examples like the Empower pension scheme in Kenya, where people can make voluntary contributions into a pension fund and the state tops it up, or they match those funds that people make. If you make a payment of 50 shillings or kwacha or rands or pula, the government will match that. So you can introduce the idea through a hybrid model between formal and informal mechanisms. And I'm sure Isabel and others will talk more about that in later sessions. Sandra from Zimbabwe asked about how important is informal social protection. I mentioned very briefly at the beginning. And I think one thing that we have not learned from is informal systems that work very well. And here in Southern Africa, I would say burial societies or pension plans are a really good example of that. As far as I know, there's no government that covers that in their social protection systems. And yet people are needing that cover. And so they are finding ways to get that insurance for themselves through the private sector, through informal and community-based mechanisms. So it's very, very important. And we need to look at what's happening informally in order to strengthen the formal social protection systems and make them better aligned with what people's real needs are. So we can learn a lot from informal social protection. And finally, Gifta Falea asked, should we merge social assistance and emergency assistance? I think that COVID-19 has definitely shown us the benefits of drawing on the strengths of each. You know, if you are a World Food Programme or you're a Ministry of Emergency Assistance or Humanitarian Relief, you can quickly get help to people that need it after a shock, after a drought or a flood or a locust infestation. But we can also learn from what social protection systems have built up in terms of registering, paying, managing beneficiaries, monitoring and evaluation, grievance procedures where people can complain if they're not getting their service, their benefits on time, etc. So we can learn from both of those and pull them together. And I think what COVID taught us is that working together, emergency relief mechanisms and social protection systems are stronger than if they work by themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I will not add anything to that, but just to say thank you so much for your presentation, taking the time to prepare it and deliver it. We are going to have a short break, and I will ask, we will have a photo session and we'll have tea, and that should be done in 15 minutes. So those that are taking the photograph, please may we have some guidance in terms of where we are congregating for the photograph. Let's share, Naka, Susan, where are we meeting for the photograph? Outside? Okay, so if we could all just make our way just out there, there's the SASPEN banner, and let's organize ourselves. 15 minutes tops, we'll be starting the next session after.